Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the main Rocky and Creed fights. This is more or less the final fight of each movie, and I decided to rank them from worst to best. There's 10 fights in total, so this is more or less a top 10 list just by design, until they make more movies in the Creed franchise, I suppose. But so without further ado, I decided to give you guys my ranking on the ones that I think are the most entertaining, and that could be for multiple reasons, whether it just be the best choreographed or most exciting or most unique. There's several factors that can be put into play. So without further ado, Rocky Balboa. I actually rather like this movie a lot, and I think it's actually a great comeback and return to form for Stallone. But the biggest problem with this fight is that it was filmed on high-def cameras. To be more specific, high-def TV cameras. It does make the fight look rather realistic, like a fight you'd be watching on TV, but it really lacks that cinematic flair, because they don't typically use that kind of camera when you film a movie. It's, completely different frame rate and everything. It looks too glossy and like you just turned on ESPN and Stallone just happened to be punching a real-life boxer. It's not a bad fight, and it does have some interesting moments in it, but ultimately it just feels kind of TV-ish to really make much of an impact. Some of the hits are pretty good, and Stallone is in great form here at 60 years old, fighting a former light heavyweight champion, and that's pretty damn interesting, but the fight itself just could be a little more exciting. Plus, it's only 10 rounds, and you don't really feel that Dixon is much of a threat, and it's probably one of the weaker Rocky villains. Still a very enjoyable fight, and Antonio Tarver could probably beat anyone's ass in real life if he had to fight with him. When it comes to the movies, he's not quite as intimidating as some of the previous Rocky villains, and the fight just is, I think, a little bit mishandled. Still fun. Coming in at number 9 is the Rocky V Street Fight. This might end up on the bottom of a lot of people's list, but I really do enjoy this fight. Rocky, who had trained Tommy Gunn in the film, gets betrayed by Tommy, and they have an all-out brawl in the streets. There's no rounds, there's no ref, there's no bell. It's just them beating the crap out of each other for about 10 minutes. It's goofy, it's really nonsensical, but it's a one hell of an ending to an unconventional Rocky film. And there's just not much to say about this one. It's just fun. You want to see Rocky beat the crap out of a real-life boxer in the streets? This is the fight for you. Not good, but entertaining. Up next, I have to go with the fight from Creed 1. I think that the opponent this time around is pretty damn good, and is also played by a real-life boxer as well, if I'm not mistaken. But it's just kind of standard. We've seen it before, and it's nothing really unique about this fight. There are some cool cinematic moments, and I actually think that the cinematography is great here. I think Ryan Coogler does a damn good job directing the scene. But it is a little bit standard, and it is the 7th movie in the franchise, so it's to be expected. But I think they could have done something a little more interesting. Fun fight, but nothing that you haven't quite seen before. Up next is Creed 3. My biggest problem with this fight is that there's not a whole lot of tension. The villain of the movie is not really much of a threat. He's a boxer kind of past his prime. He's ruthless and he's, fights dirty. But you never have the feeling that Creed's going to lose this fight. And it's probably the most unintimidating opponent of the 3 films. I do like how they have metaphorical moments in this fight, such as the ring turning into a cage, and you see it transform into parts of the kids' bedrooms when they were younger. It really flashes back to the trauma they both faced and what brought them to this point. It's cinematic, it's enjoyable. There's some nice slow-mo here. It does change things up, but it's hardly gripping, and it's more fun as a metaphor than it is as a fight. Still enjoyable, and I like what Michael B. Jordan did this time around. I think he's a pretty damn good director. This is his first movie he directed. But the fight does leave a little bit to be desired. Still entertaining, but not one of the better ones. Up next, we have the fight from Rocky IV. I rather do enjoy this fight, but I think that it also is a bit redundant of other fights. It's a lot similar to Rocky II, where they go the distance and has a final round knockout, only this time it doesn't fall down. And the fight also seems very one-sided. It doesn't seem like Drago should lose this fight. And then at the end, Rocky just pulls a win out of his ass like he often does. And while that's fine, it's like, okay, you're going to just pull that and just win again. All right, America wins, I suppose. The Cold War's over. An enjoyable fight, and one that it's just really fun to get into. Dolph Lundgren is just doing great as an opponent. But admittedly, it's a little bit silly and a little bit standard up to this point, even though it does have a lot of emotional impact. And Drago was probably the most intimidating villain of the Rocky franchise. It feels a little too one-sided to really get excited about the fight until the later rounds. Still enjoyable, but it could have been handled a little bit better, I feel. Up next is Apollo versus Rocky again in the rematch in Rocky II. This is just a really fun fight. The fight is filmed very well. The music is great and swelling. I'd say it even has a slightly better soundtrack than the first film's fight. But the only problem is it's really one-sided. And much like Rocky 4, it feels like Rocky just pulls a win out of his ass. He was just pretty much losing for 14 straight rounds. Well, maybe 13 rounds. And then out of nowhere, oh, I win. I switched to left-handed. You're going down. It's fun, but you kind of have to hold your suspension of disbelief because there's no way if you can get outclassed for that many rounds and still knock the person down, not realistically speaking. Still really enjoyable and with a really fun finish of them both getting up at the final seconds with Creed just losing by a couple of steps. A great finale to an overly absurd but fun fight. Up next is Adonis Creed versus Victor Drago from Creed 2. This is a great fight. It's the center point of the Creed saga, in my opinion. I just love how they're fighting for both their family's honor and name, and you feel for both of these fighters. Victor Drago is a great villain and one of the best of the Rocky franchise. I was very impressed with the character, and he's played so magnificently. I really like the emotional connection between these two characters, and it makes sense that they both have to fight for their name. It's the battle of not just honor, but also legacy, and it's just a great fight through and through. It lasts a total of about 10 rounds, I believe, and it ends with a TKO, which you've never really seen in the Rocky franchise before. A very enjoyable fight that is not completely one-sided. Victor is definitely the powerhouse here, but Adonis has the speed and more talent thanks to better training, and ultimately pulls a victory. It's really fun, it's really emotional, and it's very satisfying through and through. I really have no major problems with this fight. It's just the ones above it are just slightly better. A great fight and a great movie. Coming in at number 3 is the OG Apollo Creed versus Rocky Balboa. The fight for the championship of the original film is still great even all these years later. It's brutal, it's bloody. I'd love to see when they have to cut Rocky's eye open because there's so much blood built up in it that he can't see. He gets his nose broken. And the only reason Rocky even stands a chance is because Apollo more or less underestimated him and didn't prepare for the fight like he should have. But that leads to a great brawl and a back and forth, and it proves that Rocky really is able to go the distance. It's just really well handled and well directed fight by John G. Avildsen. The budget this time is very low, but they still managed to pull off a believable and gruesome fight. One of the more gruesome of the franchise. It all builds to an amazing final round where Rocky almost knocks out the champ, but he's saved by the bell and ultimately wins against Balboa. I love this fight, and it has so many memorable moments in it, as well as a great score. Mickey is just going crazy in this fight, yelling at Rocky to stay down. It's all entertaining, and one that's you have to love if you love the Rocky franchise. Coming in at number 2, though, is Rocky versus Ivan Drago from Rocky IV, the director's cut. This fixed a lot of the problems in the theatrical cut, and the fight doesn't seem super one-sided this time around. Stallone actually re-edited the footage and used some footage that he hadn't used in the original to make the fight more even and more believable. You can actually buy it when Rocky knocks out Drago in the final round. The count is still happening. It's much more believable, much more impactful, much better filmed, even though it's mostly the same footage, but they actually alter it in a way to where it flows better and it's more entertaining and just much better handled. This is the fight that Rocky IV should have been. It doesn't feel like an unrealistic back and forth that you get in the original film, but a believable fight between two titans that Rocky just manages to win. Rocky IV director's cut is much more grounded than the theatrical cut, and it really shows in this final fight, and it leads to one of the best fights of the Rocky franchise. But you can't beat my favorite, and that is Rocky versus Clubber Lang in the rematch, the Battle of the Champions. This fight is just so freaking awesome. There's no 15-round montage like in most of the fights. There's no surprise switching to the left hand or winning at the last minute. This fight is just 3 rounds of pure entertainment. First, we have Rocky just dominating Clubber in the first round. We have Clubber getting really angry and building up his strength and dominating Rocky in the second round. But then Rocky uses his anger against him and has him tire himself out and finishes him off with a third round knockout. It's just 3 rounds of pure kinetic carnage. And at the end of the fight, when Rocky is just pummeling Clubber and you know that he is screwed and there's no way that he's going to get out of this, Rocky finishes him off with that hook and knocks him to the ground. It is so exciting, and every time I watch it, I can literally feel the hairs on my arms standing up. It is amazing, and to this day, it is still my favorite fight in the Rocky franchise. I love Rocky 3, and I actually feel it's a bit underrated among the franchise. And this 3-round powerhouse battle between these two titans is highly entertaining. Mr. T did an amazing job as Clubber Lang. A great fight, pure entertainment, and pure spectacle. You just can't beat Rocky 3's final battle. Well, that's my list. I do think that all of these films do have rather unique fights, with a few being a little bit redundant, but they do manage to keep it fresh for the most part. I find that very entertaining, especially 9 movies in. 10 if you count the Rocky IV director's cut. All in all, a very entertaining franchise with a lot of entertaining fights, and hopefully when we get a Creed 4, we'll have even more entertaining fights, hopefully directed by Michael B. Jordan. I thank you all for watching. This has been a fun list to make. Leave yours down below if you'd like, or at least just tell me your favorite, and peace out.